mode this week. We've been doing, especially I'm based at Irmis, and so all week we've had seders in the different classrooms. And then, of course, this week, our Torah portion has absolutely nothing to do with any of that. So even while our minds are on one Jewish story, we are still in the midst of the wilderness. So what we are going to look at together today is bits and pieces of our Parsha. Our Parsha this week is Vayikra. It's the very first Parsha in the book of Leviticus. And so the context of this Parsha is that the Israelites have already been wandering in the wilderness for a bit. They received the Ten Commandments at Mount Sinai. They have received additional laws. And Vayikra marks this change for us from narrative to so many laws focused on the sacrificial system, focused on the priest. It is a very bloody book. And it's often referred to as the holiness code because it has so many themes of holiness related to purity and impurity and different things and how sacrifices relate to that. So there are a few pieces from this Parsha. The reason we are going to be moving around is because I'm interested in looking together at some of the different sacrifices that the Parsha speaks about. And the question I'd like us to keep in mind, I think whenever I get to study with you all, I always have like some question I'm keeping in mind as we're studying. And so the question I'd like all of us to keep in mind this week is what are the values being articulated and how are those values that we are living out in our Jewish lives today, even though our Jewish lives today look so different from what is being described. But inherent to what is being described in this Parsha and in this entire book of the Torah are these core values that have stuck with our people for thousands of years. So that's what I'd like us to keep in mind as we go through. What are the values being articulated here, and how do we live those out today as modern Jews? And I wanted, so before we jump into the text, let's say the blessing for learning Torah together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. And I want to share, I enjoy using the Eitz Chaim Humash if other people, I know some people use that as well in your own homes. I wanted to share a quote about the book of Leviticus more generally from the Eitz Chaim Humash. It quotes former chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary, where I went to rabbinical school, Ismar Shorsh. And he writes, ritual is a way of giving voice to ultimate values. Each of us needs a sense of holiness to navigate the relentless secularity of our lives. The reason I wanted to start with this quote is because the sacrificial system that we're entering into in the book of Leviticus is a way of ritualizing and bringing holiness to so many different types of moments in our own lives. And I think it's interesting the way he juxtaposes like the secularity of our lives with the holiness and the sanctity around Jewish living and Jewish ritual. So that's sort of our frame for today. We ended the book of Exodus with the building of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, the place that would be sort of the home of God amidst the Israelites as they were wandering through the wilderness. And so now that that is complete, we are getting the laws about what is to take place in that space. And what does God being amongst the Israelites even mean or look like? Why should we care about that? Why should they care about that? Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So this is Sepharia. I have up the English text of Parshat Vayikra, but I can easily switch over to the Hebrew anytime. So if we have any questions about the translation or the original Hebrew, please let me know, and we can add that to what we're studying as well. Okay, so Parshat Vayikra and the book of Leviticus, the book of Vayikra begin. Adonai called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when any of you presents an offering of cattle to Adonai, you shall choose your offering from the herd or from the flock. If your offering is a burnt offering from the herd, you shall make your offering a male without blemish. You shall bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting for acceptance in your behalf before Adonai. You shall lay a hand upon the head of the burnt offering, that it may be acceptable in your behalf in expiation for you. The bull shall be slaughtered before Adonai, and Aaron's sons, the priests, shall offer the blood, dashing the blood against all sides of the altar, which is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. The burnt offering shall be flayed and cut up into sections. The sons of Aaron, the priest, shall put fire on the altar and lay out wood upon the fire. And Aaron's sons, the priests, shall lay out the sections with the head and the suet on the wood that is on the fire upon the altar. Its entrails and legs shall be washed with water, and the priest shall turn the whole into smoke on the altar as a burnt offering, an offering by fire, a pleasing odor to Adonai.
Mary, if you do me a favor, if you prepare for me.
So the book of Leviticus begins immediately. It is going to be about sacrifices, the sacrificial system, the role that Aaron and his sons play as priests, and the book jumps right into the very first one. So what is jumping out to people as we read the opening verses of the book of Leviticus? Yeah, Rebecca.
The exactness. There seems to be an exactness as well as a attention to detail in how the animal is to be laid on the altar.
Nice. So there's precision about very specific precision about what the sacrifice is, how it is performed, what pieces are used, what we do with each and every piece. What do we think the values are underlying that precision throughout the process? Because it's not just unique to these opening verses, that is a theme we see throughout this entire book. What is the value behind that? Yeah, Rebecca, go ahead.
I think it's respect for the animal that's being sacrificed.
Nice.
I mean, the fact that they're washing the entrails and the legs.
And it's looking at different pieces of the animal and naming that it has different pieces and different components to it. I think that is like also part of that respect that's being shown, is it's not just like put the animal on the altar, but seeing the animal as made up of different facets. Other things you noticed or the value system behind that specificity? Yeah, Pnina. Oh, you are muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. My father-in-law was a butcher in Israel. And I remember that there were certain cuts that weren't kosher, literally. And I was wondering, I never paid attention exactly to see which parts were not edible. But I know that some sections of the same cow were not kosher. And he was friends like with the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, Rabbi Franco, and the rabbi used to come and give his like a stamp that those whatever it is was for purchasing would be kasher, to make it all, and the rest of it was not. I don't know what they did with it. Never paid attention, and I'm really wondering till today. is there anywhere that I can find exactly what portions were kosher or not?
Yeah, that aren't kosher. Yeah, later in the Torah, later in the book of Vayikra, it talks about that. And then Rambam in his Mishnah Torah talks about that. And also in Yosef Karo Shulchan Aruch, it talks about that as well. And also, I just want to clarify too that what we're looking at here, the laws of kashrut have not even been given yet. The laws of kashrut come a couple parshiot, from now in the book of Vayikra, in the book of Leviticus. And this isn't even, what we're looking at now isn't even for eating. This is specifically for the purpose of a sacrifice to God. Yeah, Douglas, go ahead. Oh, wait, I'm going to unmute you.
There we go.
Okay.
It doesn't say where the sacrifice took place. I mean, it gives a general idea, but is it right in front of the altar? It says they splashed blood on the altar. So is this sacrifice done on the ground?
So it's very specific, but it also leaves a bit of room for interpretation that it tells us exactly like what goes where, when, but there's still some room there that isn't being as exacting. And so even while we have this ritual in a specific order, in a specific way, with these specific materials, there's still a little bit of room. When I think about the value system behind that and behind having this specificity, it also makes me think about what today we do instead of sacrifices, which is prayer, and that we have all the prayers in the Siddur written out. And at the same time, there is space in those prayers to add our own kavanah, our own intentions, to add ourselves. And so we have, even in the Torah, we have this balance between ritual that is heavily structured, but also leaves some room for us to question, interpret, and put ourselves into it as well. Other things that are standing out here.
Well, they couldn't possibly pick up a bull and put it on top of a 3-foot altar. I mean, this is a heavy animal. So
there were a lot of people, though. There were a lot of people helping. And they were cutting it up. They were putting like a full, yeah.
Sure. Yep.
But I think that's also part of the value system I see here is it's not what we are currently looking at. There's some pieces from the book of Vayikra that are just the responsibility of Aaron as the high priest, but this is not. This involves several people. And so I think that's also an interesting piece of this too, is that making an offering to God is not something that exists for just one person in a vacuum. It actually requires relationship with others, communication with others, and coordination. Yeah, Brad, what were you going to say?
The other value is purity. The animal has to be without blemish.
Nice. That is one of, excuse me, that same phrase, without blemish, we see over and over and over again in the book of Vayikra, that there is a purity in the animal that's being offered, and we are going to see there is a purity that is required of the people as well. That some sacrifices are brought because of a person becoming impure and needing to become pure again. And so this theme of purity is really important here. And I also just want to clarify that it's a ritual purity. It's not like washing your hands with soap makes your hands pure. That makes your hands clean, which is different than ritual purity. Yeah, Pnina. Pnina, I'm going to unmute you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I remember specifically that the tongue was kosher. And now that you're talking about it, and I wonder if there is any connection also to the Ten Commandments that you're not supposed to be a false witness, and also we have a very, very important sentence in Hebrew that say, "Achaim ve'amavet beyad halashon." Life and death are in the hand of the tongue. So what you say has the strength, or the gives someone the ability to either keep him alive or kill him. So it's like, the tongue is very important, not just because it's something that helps you swallow, but it has to do with the speech, with speaking, not to speak lies, not to be a false witness. So I was wondering if those pieces that are kept kosher has anything to do with values, like living style, and
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
not, or there was other reasons for it. Like part of the reproduction, parts of the bull are kosher. I want you
Right.
to.
I don't want to get too far down the kashrut line, just because we'll be talking about kashrut in a few weeks in Parshat Shmini.
Oh, okay.
And so that's why I really want to focus here. But your point about the bearing false witness actually comes up at the end of this portion. So we're going to get to that, about the specific type of offering that relates to that sin. Yeah, Rebecca, go ahead.
I guess the question is about the amount of blood. I just looked it up on the internet. A bull would have something like 8 gallons of blood.
Wow.
And to do all of that right in front of the altar?
So blood from an animal, we think of it as defiling, but based on this text, it seems that blood sprinkled in this way is part of what offers purity to the person making the offering. And so it's also a reconfiguration of how we think about some of these things today, and taking ourselves out of it and looking at, well, how is the text relating to blood here? And so my take is that the text, not just my take, but one of the ways I read it is that the text is seeing blood as literally life. It's not some like gross substance that represents like death in this case, but it actually represents life. And so by sprinkling it and by incorporating it into the ritual, it's one of the things that is not being eaten. Blood is one of the things that is forbidden from being eaten because it represents life. And what does it mean to make an offering in which life is part of that? And I want to point out here, I'm just going to switch the language. I'm going to add the Hebrew here, because I want everyone to see the Hebrew word for offering, which is korban. So it's here, kuf resh vet, in different forms. So presenting an offering, this is offering. So it keeps using, the book of Leviticus keeps using that same word for offering, which is korban. And the reason I'm so interested in this word is because in Hebrew, the word for closeness is karov, which is spelled the same way as korban. So curious to hear what people make of that connection linguistically. The connection between closeness and an offering or a sacrifice. Okay. Panina, I see your hand. I want to make sure someone who hasn't gotten a chance to talk as much also gets a chance. Thank you. if korban comes from the same Hebrew word as to be close, what do you think the purpose is of a sacrifice or an offering?
To get closer to God.
Yeah. So it's trying to create this closeness with God, trying to create an intimacy. And to me, when we think again about prayer now being what we have in a world bereft of a temple, prayer now being what we have instead of sacrifice, using prayer similarly as a way to become closer to God. And so for me, I love that connection in the Hebrew because the sacrificial system, like Rebecca pointed out, the blood, and like Douglas pointed out, like this big, massive, heavy bull. There are so many pieces to it that feel really distant and very different from what we do today. But the word korban, which is why I like saying korban better than offering or sacrifice, because offering and sacrifice in English don't get to what a korban actually is. The Hebrew word korban tells you that it is about being close to God and trying to become close to God. And we saw in the previous book, in the book of Exodus, while the Israelites were building the Mishkan, all of those instructions came from God for what the people were supposed to build. And so it was like God saying, Israel, I want to be close to you. This is how I'm going to be close to you. I'm going to give you the specific instructions for building. You are going to create a sanctuary for me with those instructions, and that is how I will be close to you. And then the book of Leviticus opens with the Israelites now reciprocating that and trying to become closer to God through these sacrifices. So we can also use the word sacrifice, offering, and korban interchangeably, but I like korban because I think that speaks to also the arc of our narrative of going from God trying to become close to Israel to us trying to become close to God. Yeah, Susan.
Yes, I have a question. So what is your take on the specificity of that? Is it solely respect or is there something more? Because I was always a little put off by that, this part and that part and the suet. I had to look up what a suet was. It was it's the heart fat.
Yeah.
So tell me your take on that.
So I think one, it is linked to respect for me, similar to Rebecca said, like for the animal, but also respect to God, that when we put our effort into something, the way that we are doing it shows respect. It's not just the act itself of the korban, but it's the way we do it by putting care into every little piece, by taking note of the different things that are there. Also thinking about that creature as God's creation and showing respect to God through how we relate to that creature. Also, I think for me, ritual is very much about ordering chaos. And so connecting to God can be something very challenging and daunting and big. And how do I even begin? And it's much easier, I think, if somebody says, well, these are the specific things that you can do. And once you have completed this to-do list, that is how you can become close to God. And you can take care in each little piece of that. Brad and Meryl.
Yeah, that's a good one. Because that's how the world was created, putting order out of chaos too.
Yeah, it's true. And that's also a way of honoring God. Is what does it mean to be created in God's image? It is to act in godly ways in the world, which means creating that order. All right, Brad and then Meryl. Susan, do you have anything else you want to say? I'm sorry.
No, my question was for you and you answered it very well. Thank you.
Okay. Brad, go ahead.
Yeah, my problem with the closeness of the people to God is that the people are absent from this process. It's only Aaron and his sons who are participants. So where are the people?
That's a great question. So Aaron and his sons are the ones who are doing this ritual, and it's the people who need to find that unblemished animal. There are different types of animals for different sacrifices. So it's on the person to find that animal, to bring it at the right time to this place. And then the priest and Aaron are doing this on behalf of that person. So the responsibility, like the initiative is on the people themselves, even though the ritual is on Aaron. But also we'll see in later in the Parsha, different sacrifices are brought by individuals and others are for an entire community. Yeah, Meryl, go ahead.
So I guess my question is, I think it was Rebecca said that we're not supposed to eat blood. If we eat very rare meat, does that mean we're being disrespectful to God as far as what the sacrifices might be?
So again, I want to differentiate between what is kosher and what is used in a sacrifice, because the laws about keeping kosher are for our consumption. The laws about sacrifices are completely different laws that are related to these offerings. So the reason why, like for those who keep kosher, do not eat blood. Rare meat doesn't include blood. Blood is like literally eating blood of an animal. And it also, there are like certain veins in an animal that are known to be bloody veins that are not permitted in the laws of kashrut, because again, they're like a lifeline for that animal.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, does that make sense?
Yes, I'll continue eating my rare food.
Yeah, yeah. And you'll see kosher restaurants serve very rare food. Yeah. Panina, go ahead. I'm asking you to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I think the whole idea is to teach them that they are able to think, that they are not machines, and to separate them from the pagans that were following whatever it is, whoever was calling themselves high priest, and they were throwing literally like virgins or humans into the fire, and that was supposed to be a sacrifice. I think the whole idea was that people should know that they have a choice, that they can think and separate, like, don't be like an animal that you'll eat anything. You are not a machine, you are not an animal. God gave us brain, and we are able to separate and to think what it is that it's going to be admissible or humanitarian or even practical. So the whole idea is sit there and yes, don't participate, but don't stop thinking. Mm-hmm. When you think, you are also make it possible for the other person while you are leading, like the priest and the staff and their staff. You are leading, but yet you're including the people also, and you're giving them a choice. Yes, you're watching us doing this, but know that there is choices that you yourselves are going to do later on. They'll do the killing, yeah, but you can decide what you want to eat and what you don't want to eat. Give them the options, to tell the people that they were given options, that they are able to think. And that's the main thing that I see from this whole thing, because eventually when people thought that those rituals were not necessary anymore, they stopped even from being there. So wherever that the Torah was aimed to do, to teach them to think and to separate, it actually worked, because certain things they decided that they don't even need to do anymore, and they stopped doing it. And that was against what was done before there was a presence of God there. When there was idols with the high priest, which we call today the false ones, were only, they were throwing people into the fire. Well, we already made a big step. They are not throwing people down. They're talking about
and our tradition never included human sacrifice in any way.
God forbid, never a human sacrifice, never ever.
Exactly. And one of the things that I think in terms of the choice that I think is interesting about one of the continued themes, which is something Brad brought up earlier, of every animal, no matter what animal it is, what the sex of the animal is, it always says without blemish. And so there's choice, but there's also not. That like there are prescribed animals to be brought, and the Torah is saying you can't just bring any, if you need to make a sacrifice to God for some reason and you have an animal lying around that you want to get rid of, that's actually not the animal that you can use for a sacrifice. You need to use something, you need to use an animal that is perfect, an animal that shows a level of respect for God for this ritual, and realizing that it actually is a sacrifice. There is a piece of you that you are now giving up for something else, for this sense of closeness, and that there's an effort to be made for that. And just thinking about, going back to that value system, when I think about what does piety, religious expression look like today, there are so many ways to do, I guess, like do Jewish. And we all know when we are maybe in prayer and we have the kavanah, we have the intention that we feel like we are meant to have, or when we're just sitting there and we really don't want to be there. Or maybe when some kind of, like, I don't know, different contributions are made. I think there are interesting equivalents to this with modern day Jewish life and living, ways of, I guess, performing piety versus really feeling that sense of piety, that sense of respect and closeness inside in our souls. All right, any last comments on, oh, actually, I wanted to bring up one more thing. I have a last comment on this. Okay, one more thing I wanted to bring up at the end. So it talks about this offering of fire. This offering, by the way, is called an olah, which literally means, if you think of the word aliyah, like going up, this offering needs to go up because it is going up in smoke. And at the end it says, an offering by fire of pleasing odor to Adonai. This is a phrase that also comes up over and over again, that the rabbis are very troubled with, because the implication is, one, that God smells, and two, that God cares about that smell, and that a smell impacts God in some way. So the rabbis find that phrase to be very troubling, and try to figure out, well, what's the value system behind it? What could it mean? So before we move on, I do want to hear if anybody has thoughts on what that could mean.
Well, Maimonides would have discounted this very.
Yes, Maimonides did not like this. Yeah.
Very strongly.
Any anthropomorphism of God, he was not happy about. And most rabbis agreed with him. And this comes up over and over again. It's not just like taking issue with one little verse in the Torah. It's taking issue with something that we get over and over and over again.
I also think, that God smells, and that we have to do that. But the Catholics, don't they have incense in their ceremonies, smoke? And then I don't know whether incense is pleasing or not, because I haven't been in a mass, but I believe that incense is part of that. They've adopted a lot of the rituals of the high priest, I found it. Sense thing, but I can see it would be troubling.
And I wonder, I don't know enough about Catholic Mass to know if it's supposed to be incense for God or incense for another purpose. I'm not sure. but that this is specifically incense for God, or not incense, but a pleasing odor for God.
Or maybe it's because the bull smelled so much. I mean,
Yeah.
you've got a dead bull there and blood and everything. That may cover up the smell of the offering, which also is, can be repugnant. So.
Right, and barbecue, if you think about a barbecue or a campfire, like anytime I'm around a campfire, my hair smells for a week and my clothes smell for a week.
Yeah.
So I imagine this must have been a very strong something. Okay, Benjamin and then Brad.
Thank you, Rabbi Fein. Not sure if this plays in, but the physiology of smells and the way they lay in our brain, we can remember smells for a long time. They can lay down very strong memories. Sometimes I say, gee, that's how it smelled when I'd go to my grandmother's house as a little boy or something. So maybe there's something that we're not even thinking about how strong and how these odors and smells can leave these imprints that can have a very positive or potentially negative impact on our minds and our
Nice.
psyche.
I love that. And thinking about if smell has such a strong imprint on our own memory, and we are trying to become closer to God through these korbanot, through these sacrifices, then maybe smell can have that same impact on God that we are hoping to have. Nice. Brad and then Rebecca. Panina, I see you. I just want to make sure other people who hadn't gotten a chance to talk as much get to talk too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also on that idea of closeness because by attributing to God a human characteristic, that's a way of bringing God closer to us. So again, it's your idea of closeness.
Yeah, so it's trying to imagine that we have something in common with God, that just as we see or experience a pleasing odor as something that is elevated, as a way of elevating a ritual, we want to give that same respect to God. And what we want, it's like almost like treating God the way, we would want to be honored. Yeah, Rebecca.
Adding to what Benjamin said, I worked with people that have dementia and Alzheimer's, and oftentimes we would circulate things for them to smell, just to help stimulate memory.
Wow, that's so interesting. And I wonder too about there are so many different types of animals. There's also a grain offering. And so I imagine each one has a different smell. And so the memory that's linked to that specific offering can for God, but maybe also for the community. I mean, if we think about prayer, I think about prayer so much as like for me or for our community, even more so than for God. But maybe God is pleased by the odor because it links for everybody in the camp. It's something everyone can smell and can link to their own memory, maybe as a reminder of what to do, what not to do. That's ever present. Okay, so I want to skip to, this is a very long Parsha. We are going to skip to chapter 4. Okay, so the Parsha outlines many, many different types of sacrifices. All right, and we're going to read the first few verses here and then switch around a little bit. So chapters 4 and 5 really focus on sacrifices that have to do with atonement and forgiveness. So a lot of the things that we think about during Yom Kippur, and also we read about during Yom Kippur, especially the role that the high priest would play in those rituals. And this is also, we have those themes of purity and impurity on display here. All right. Adonai spoke to Moses saying, "Speak to the Israelite people thus. When a person unwittingly incurs guilt in regard to any of Adonai's commandments about things not to be done, and does one of them, if it is the anointed priest who has incurred guilt, so that blame falls upon the people, he shall offer for the sin of which he is guilty a bull of the herd without blemish as a sin offering to Adonai. And then from here, it goes on to those same details as we had before. We're not going to read all of them, but that's sort of the introduction to this. And the reason I wanted to skip to this is because the introduction to this offering is very different. And now we're going to look at different introductions to offerings. So what is this particular offering about?
Well, it's about a priest who is, or here is, you have two different paragraphs.
Yeah.
The first one is unintentional sin of anybody, of a person. And the second one is of a priest who did something wrong. And being that the priest is representative of the people, the priest, and which were all he's then, becomes guilty. And that is a sin. And how does he repair that for himself and for the people?
Nice. So the different layers of even when somebody unknowingly does something wrong, there are korbanot, there are offerings that need to be brought. And even if it has been the priest still has to bring an offering, and the blame ends up falling on the entire community because the priest is that representation for everybody. So I think all of these layers are very interesting. One beginning with the assumption that everybody's going to, or not everybody, but the assumption that people are going to mess up.
Yeah.
And we'll do it by mistake. I like that it's assuming goodwill of the people too, which is like what we all should do for each other also. But this is assuming goodwill, assuming that people really want to follow God's commandments and all the rules, but like sometimes they don't know or they forget and they mess up. I also like that it acknowledges that the priest also messes up, because we think about the priest as one, a representative for the community, and two, as somebody who does have that closeness to God in a very different way. And God saying, my like point person within the entire community is also fallible. To me, that's very powerful. That a priest doesn't need to be somebody who's absolutely perfect, that God has this closeness and still trust in somebody who is fallible and, doesn't have any malintent, but everybody messes up and God recognizes that. Other things that are standing out about these few
Question,
verses.
does God mess up?
I think we see God mess up. We see God apologizing. I mean, even as early as the story of Noah and the flood. And
Yes.
that's the very first covenant that we have an example of in the entire Torah. And God says, I will never do that again. And which is also interesting that the very first time people ever enter into a covenant with God is when God messes up. And like God is big enough, literally big enough to admit that. And so the same is expected of us, that when we mess up, whether we knew it or not, we still have a responsibility to make it right.
Thank you. I like that, because I've had people declare, well, God is perfect. Well, if God is perfect, why do bad things happen? But that may have nothing to do with it. But I like that where he messes up. But he admits it. God admits it.
Yes. And even when God is so angry at the Israelites in different moments in the wilderness, Moses argues on behalf of the Israelites and changes God's mind.
Right.
God argues with Abraham. Like there are a lot of examples, and they all happen at key points in our narrative too.
Thank you.
Yeah, Nina, go ahead. I'm unmuting you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I think today, people still bring stuff to Jerusalem, but it's mostly fruits and vegetables. There was a time that they brought a pair of doves, but they don't do even that anymore. They could bring a bunch of wheat from a bundle, but mostly they bring fruits and vegetables. So I think the whole idea was to develop the people. I'm going back to the sacrifices because that was a symbol, and it was a gradual, what you call um, to slowly make people less and less keen to even go toward sacrificing an animal. The fact that they have to start thinking of what's kosher and what's not, it's to make it harder for them and say in the end, who needs this? We're just not going to sacrifice this anymore because they're not going to want the burden of maybe making a mistakes. So to make it easier for people, they said, okay, don't do this, don't do this, do that. Eventually, today, it turned into fruits and vegetables. They go, the 7th graders, they go with baskets. They put bunches of wheat. They put like I said, vegetables and fruit, and they bring, and flowers. And they bring it still to Jerusalem. They call it Aliyah LaRegel. And they do
a pilgrimage.
Yes. And it's like, again, I'm saying it's to make people, to show people that they have choices. They can make choices. And the smell is a big part of that because the smell of a flower and the smell of a dead cow being burnt, it's so different. And so necessary to show that you don't need this kind of smell to show that you are thankful for what you got.
And we
Or
also
ask for something.
Right. And we also have different choices in terms of the animals in this Parsha of what can be brought based on different people's wealth and accessibility to these different animals. And so that's also something that I like about the way that the sacrifices are described here, is that it's trying to make this enterprise of becoming closer to God accessible to anybody. And so if you can't afford the bull, there are birds you can bring. If you can't afford that, there's different kinds of grain you can bring. And the Torah lists for us all the different stages based on what a person is able to give. Okay, and I want to skip down. Okay, I just want to look at verses 13 and 14. So this is the same topic of bringing a sacrifice for something that, because you did something that you shouldn't have done, but you did not know about that. If it is the community leadership of Israel that is erred, and the matter escapes the notice of the congregation, so that they do any of the things by which Adonai's commandments ought not to be done, and they realize guilt when the sin through which they incurred guilt becomes known, the congregation shall offer a bull of the herd as a sin offering and bring it before the tent of meeting. And then it describes the same exact set of rituals as was for the priest in the previous example. So I think, so then, and then after this, the Parsha goes on to say, well, if it's a secular chief in the congregation who does this, if this is one person who does it, any one person, it says it nefesh echad meha'aretz. There are different like levels of responsibility of different types of people. However, the thing that they are bringing and the way they are bringing it and what is done with that thing is exactly the same. So there's also an interesting, like, Israel in this time does not seem so democratic. We have like a hierarchy of priests. There seem to be a lot of different hierarchies, but when it comes to the sacrificial system, there is something democratic about it, that each person, no matter what their status in society, they are obligated towards the exact same rules. If you need to apologize for something, if you need to become close to God, if you need to become purified in some way, it is the same for everybody. Rebecca, and then we're gonna close up.
It sounds like there was a lot of sacrifices, given that nobody's perfect, right? So did they have like certain days of the week, or were days set apart just for sacrifices?
So there were so many different types of sacrifices. Certain sacrifices were offered all the time. Certain sacrifices were offered only on Shabbat, like for Shabbat. Like there was a Passover sacrifice offered for Passover. And so there's an entire category of holiday sacrifices as a way to become close to God for that holiday. The category we're looking at now is the category of atonement and those sacrifices. We don't have specific days or times for those. However, specific days and times are given for sacrifices related to holidays. And the reason that the Talmud says, one of the reasons why Jews traditionally pray 3 times a day is because there was a morning sacrifice that was offered, an afternoon sacrifice that was offered, and an evening sacrifice that was offered that would burn all night. And then an extra sacrifice that was offered on Shabbat. And so there are different types of sacrifices, and then depending on which one it might be. But these atonement sacrifices, I don't think there's any specific time frame given. It's really when the moment happens that in this case somebody realizes it, they are expected to step up and offer a sacrifice. Okay. So we only have a few minutes left. So I want to end just by thanking everybody for learning together today. As I learn more about the book of Vayikra, the more interested in it I become. I think it's easy to just look at these sacrifices and the blood and the animals on the surface, and it seems very off-putting. But deep within these words, as we've been learning about together today, there is the foundation of our entire value system for Jewish living. And I find that very powerful. So thank you, everybody, for helping to illuminate bits and pieces of that today, and wishing everybody a Shabbat of closeness in whatever way you need it, the Shabbat. And Chag Sameach if I don't see you before Pesach.
Thank you.
Thank you. Shabbat
Thank you.
Thank you,
Chag
Rabbi
Sameach,
Fein.
Shabbat
everyone.
Shalom.
Thank you.
Chag
Very
Sameach,
good.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Shabbat
Bye.
Shalom.
Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.